Welcome into the latest episode of the Charm City Birdwatch Podcast. I'm your host, Jake McDonald. For all things Charm City Birdwatch, we are on Twitter at CharmCityBW, Facebook.com/CharmCityBirdwatch, and CharmCityBirdwatch.com. We are on Instagram as well. All the social media is on our website, and of course, you're listening to this podcast through either iTunes or SoundCloud. Please subscribe to us and give us that 5-star review. We really do appreciate it. Give us a comment letting us know what you like, what you don't like, how we can improve, what content you would like to see going forward, that sort of deal. On today's episode of the podcast, I've been wanting to do this interview forever as a listener of his podcast alongside Chris Simms, really since day one of the podcast. We have Bleacher Report host and reporter Adam Lefkoe, co-host of the Simms and Lefkoe Podcast alongside Chris Simms. You can follow Adam on Twitter at Adam Lefkoe, and the Simms and Lefkoe Podcast is on Twitter at Simms and Lefkoe. Definitely one of the top football podcasts that I really enjoy. I highly recommend it. I've shown my father. I've shown a couple of my friends. I've told them about the podcast. They all really enjoy it. Definitely a big reason why we're seeing the Bleacher Report takeover of the sports world. So definitely really excited to have this interview with Bleacher Report host and reporter Adam Lefkoe. So welcoming in Bleacher Report host and reporter Adam Lefkoe into the podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Lefkoe, and the Simms and Lefkoe Podcast is on Twitter at Simms and Lefkoe, and you can, of course, leave them a review on iTunes. They do read iTunes reviews every week on their podcast, so if you go and rate them 5 stars, they'll go ahead and read that and give you a shout-out. So before we get into the football, I wanted to dive into your experience at Syracuse a little bit. Of course, you graduated in 2008. Just a little information of how you got from there to where you are now, Bleacher Report, and a little tidbit. I was actually at Syracuse a couple months ago because my cousin's daughter, her name is Haley McDonald. She just graduated from the business school there, but she played women's lacrosse there for 4 years, so I've seen the dome and everything. So just before we get started with the football perspective here, where you got today from Syracuse over to Bleacher Report.
Sure. And I'll say what up to everybody that's listening to your podcast right now. Thank you so much for having me on yours. I think it's a lot of fun. I saw your email and I got excited. It's been an interesting journey. So before I graduated, I did a bunch of internships like ESPN Radio and NFL Network, and then I did one for a local TV. And then my first job, I was a news reporter in Hastings, Nebraska, which paid me an incredible amount of money. First year I made $18,500. Second year I made $19,500 because that raise, man, that changed my life. That was a hot tub in the apartment and everything. I covered local city government. I covered a goat fashion show. But then I would go in on my off days on Saturday, and I would go cover the Nebraska football games, just to get like sports on my resume tape or my highlight reel. I worked there for 2 years. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about living in the middle of nowhere. And then I went to Louisville, Kentucky, where I got hired again as a news reporter. But a little trick that I would tell anyone that's interested in moving up in the broadcasting realm is when you look at news stations' websites, you should look at under the bios when it says people started, because there's like a template that everyone uses. So it'll be like, Ron was happy to join the WSTM team in March 2005. Well, if it's March 2007, his contract's probably coming up. So that's like, if it's 2 or 3 year contracts, that's typically how the business is. So I took that Louisville job knowing that one of the sports people's contract was coming out. And for like 4 or 5 months, I just kind of went in there and was like, listen, like, is there any way that when this contract expires, I can move over? They tried me in sports and it worked. I got to cover multiple national championships with Louisville and Kentucky. I did a documentary in Kentucky about the rivalry. And that got shown in movie theaters and all that stuff. And then towards the end, I was getting bored, and I started reaching out to Twitter to just be like, hey, give me some random words, and I'll throw them on TV. Because I would do that with my friends, and they thought it was hilarious. Like, one of them would say, hey, tonight, say meow. And, like, someone would have hit a home run. I'd be like, meow, that one is out of here. And they would send me these videos of people cracking up. So I said, let's do this with Twitter. And the first one I did was wrestling. And I did like 40 wrestle things, whether it's like wrestlers' names or moves or whatever. And that got picked up by a few websites and got like over 100,000 views on YouTube. And I was like, okay, let's do it again. And this week we're going to do Seinfeld. And that really blew up. And I still have people that say, hey, you're the guy that did all the Seinfeld references. The week after that, I did hip hop, and it was called Rapcast. And that one, at one point the next day, it got tweeted out by Time Magazine. And then 1 minute later, it got tweeted out by World Star Hip Hop. And that's when I was like, holy crap, like this has touched a lot more people than I thought it would. I had got an agent before. A ton of agents had turned me down, and then they were all calling me. And then the agent I was with was like, listen, I had this interview up in Bleacher Report. So I came up to Bleacher Report and met everybody, and it worked out. And when I first came to Bleacher Report, I moved to New York, and we were doing Team Stream Now, which means I would interview like 40 people a day from a room. So like I'd be in a room with a camera, and I'd interview a Giants beat writer, and then a Jets beat writer, and then a Ravens beat writer, and then an Eagles beat writer, because we were trying to make news for each individual stream. Like if you only follow the Ravens, that's all you got. And now it's moved to where I'm hosting a podcast with Simms. We're doing a lot more national NFL stuff. They send me all over the place to like kind of interview athletes and like Instagram people. And it's just, we're all trying to figure out what exactly people want to watch. And Bleacher Report's a cool place to be to do it. So that's kind of been my path since I graduated.
Now, going into the Simms and Lefkoe podcast again, it's Simms and Lefkoe on Twitter. I've been listening since day one. I haven't gotten the chance to go on and leave. I have been listening because I did follow you guys from the Team Stream Now before that, and I knew you guys were starting your own podcast, so I have been listening since the first episode. Absolutely. So getting into now, it has evolved. It used to be just football, like shorter episodes, but now we're starting to see it evolve into a thing where we're talking about more a podcast for the players. You guys have dived into going vegan and dieting. I know you tried going the vegan route as well, and even diving into some political topics like with kneeling during the national anthem. But we're not going to get too political into this because everybody's views are so diverse. But just kind of talk about the emergence of the podcast and the shift from going just to football to all the topics you guys have gone into.
Yeah, football has always been like the core of what our discussion is. Like we'll never do a podcast, an episode that doesn't eventually talk about football. But I think as my friendship with Simms has grown, our conversations have grown. So at first it was, I see you at work and let's talk about football. And then we started hanging outside of work, and then we started texting each other, and then we started going, hey, did you see this movie? Hey, did you see what happened on TV last night? Like, what are you eating? Like, Lefkoe, you're fat. Like, you got to do something. Like, stuff like that. So it's just, what happens with any of these shows is it's all about the connection between the talent. So when you look at, like, all of the successful TV franchises or shows, it's all about those relationships because that's where that spark kind of happens. And so with us, it went, we're going to talk about football. Now, the players' first thing, it was so tiring of, like, reading comments and reading articles, like, calling out players for being selfish and, like, never listening to what they have to say. And Simms is one of those guys where he's been in the locker room. He knows that that's crap. And I know just from, like, meeting all these players that, like, we just treat football players like a lesser type of human compared to other athletes. NBA players get like hundreds of millions of dollars, and we know like the 8th guy like the 12th guy on the Knicks. Meanwhile, like if Cam Chancellor took his helmet off and walked around the street, like no one would know who he is. So we just reached a point where we were like, we're just going to take their side more than most because that's the side that we believe in. But it's definitely been fun to watch it grow. And since Simms is a weird individual, I'd like to pick topics that accentuate how weird he is.
Now, a quick question about Chris Simms. He did 2 Ravens games for CBS last year. He did the 2 road games in Cleveland and Cincinnati. Is he doing any more games this year? Because I personally enjoy his fresh perspective being on color commentary, because so many of the guys that are doing games now are a little bit older, whereas Simms comes from an era that I grew up watching him as a child. Is he sticking around for any more CBS commentary this year at all?
I know that he is going to be doing pre and post game, and I think halftime for Notre Dame, which I am personally insanely excited for, because Chris tells it like it is, and he really doesn't care what you think. And if there's one group that I would be afraid to do that with, it's Notre Dame fans, just because they're insanely conservative. So I'm kind of hoping something crazy happens. I would enjoy that. But I think he's also doing stuff with Pro Football Talk, so I don't think he's working with CBS this year. I'm not sure, though, but I'm almost positive that he's doing like 3 or 4 jobs all over the place, because I agree with you. His perspective is great for a few reasons. One, he's young. 2, he hasn't been in the business for a crazy long time like a lot of these guys, and he actually watches the game. Like, I don't think people realize, like, we talk about how all the time NFL players don't watch the games. Like, there's a large percentage of actual NFL players that on a Monday night are not watching Monday Night Football, and that seems crazy. But there's also a really large amount of announcers and commentators that are not watching that game. Simms literally watches every single game on tape and goes through and tries to figure out, like, hey, man, this Taywan Taylor kid on Tennessee is really good, or you need to check out this 4th defensive end on the Seahawks line. Whereas he goes and does these shows, and he comes into work, and I go, dude, I watched this morning. Like, I don't think that guy knew what he was talking about. And he goes, dude, no one gets it. And that's why I think we like talking to each other. Like, I was laying with my girlfriend last night, and she was reading a book, and I was watching the Seahawks-Vikings game on mute, and I was, like, taking notes about, like, Jaron Reed's ability to push the pocket in the middle. And it's like, when you really care about something, it's not work. You know what I mean? It's a lot of fun, and I think he's still having fun where a lot of people, it's just work.
We have Bleacher Report host and reporter Adam Lefkoe on the Charm City Birdwatch podcast today. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Lefkoe. So diving into this year's NFL, the 2017 season, not necessarily like division winners, but I want to dive more into some under the radar teams that nobody's talking about. You know, a lot of the attention really seems to be on the Tennessee Titans that haven't made the postseason in forever. What are some teams that you are looking at that people aren't talking about but should be paying attention to?
I think one team, I'm going to pull up the teams. If you listen to the podcast, you know that that's a joke. I think about the NFC East, and everyone keeps saying it's like the toughest division. I actually think no one's talking about Washington. And I look at, they have an amazing offensive line, which not a lot of teams in the NFL can say. And I think that Kirk Cousins is good and Terrell Pryor is going to be great. And I don't know about their defense, but I think they're going to be able to put up a lot of points. I think the Vikings are maybe my pick for the team everyone's sleeping on. Just looking at them yesterday, and when you look at their depth chart and just see how deep they are and how huge they are and how good their defense is, I worry about their offensive line, but I think they're going to be really good. I think the Saints could be really good. They beat the spread like 3rd in the NFL last year, which means they exceeded expectations a lot, and I think their defense has gotten a lot better. I think I get worried about Jameis Winston. I think that's my rare take right now is I'm just seeing him make so many bad decisions. Like, he'll be great, 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 and then bad that I get scared. Let me just think of any other team. I think the Texans are going to be good, even though everyone always writes them off and they want to pick the Titans or the Colts. And I think Arizona is going to have I think Arizona and Carolina are both going to get – they were great 2 years ago. They were awful last year. I think they're going to be playoff contenders this year. I think both of them will be. And I think the NFC is going to be a lot deeper than people think it's going to be.
Well, moving on to our last topic with Bleacher Report host and reporter Adam Lefkoe, the Eagles and the Ravens. Considering that you grew up an Eagles fan, and I grew up as a Ravens fan, thoughts on the two teams? You know, the Eagles really seem to have a bright outlook with a young quarterback, and now he's got some weapons to throw the ball to. And the Ravens, you know, I know Chris Simms has picked them to possibly be a Super Bowl contender, but with all the injuries they've sustained, it's really hard to keep that picture really in the forefront there. So just thoughts on these two teams before we, kick off the third preseason game in the regular season.
Yeah, the Eagles, I think, can actually be a NFC East contender, and I do think they can make a run. Watching them the first few weeks in preseason, their defense is going to be special, like really special. Like you might have to draft them in your fantasy league special because they fly around. Fletcher Cox, and I want to say thank you for Timmy Jernigan because he looks amazing in our scheme. Like he was great with you guys, but he was always meant to kind of play what he's playing now, which is attacking. With Ronald Darby, who in the first game, I do a Philadelphia podcast too that talks a lot about the Eagles, and the other guys had never seen Ronald Darby, and they were worried about losing Jordan Matthews. They watched a few plays of Ronald Darby, and everyone was like, holy crap, what a steal. My big concern, how far the Eagles will go, I don't know how good their offensive line is going to be. The Eagles were great last year when Lane Johnson played. Everyone remembers the blowout of the Steelers. That was because that was the last game Lane Johnson played before a 10-game suspension. With Jason Peters and Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey excuse me, and Brandon Brooks at right guard, and kind of they have Samelo at left guard. They can be good, but they've been getting beat a lot in the preseason, and LeGarrette Blount has nowhere to run. And my other concern with the Eagles that I do not have with the Ravens is I don't know how good Doug Peterson is. Their coach made a lot of questionable decisions late in games last year, so I have to watch and see what we're going to learn. No such problem with the Ravens. Your coaching staff is great. I look at your team and I go, okay, so we still have Ronnie Stanley. We still have Marshall Yanda. You signed Austin Howard. You just brought back Jeremy Zuttau, which I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. You definitely lost some guys from the O-line, but it's very rare that the Ravens O-line doesn't find a way to come together. And I think because you have three guys in your offensive line, you might be able to cover up the other dudes. Tight ends, hey, Max Williams, can we show up? Like you were supposed to be the top tight end in the draft, and I haven't heard about you in 2 years. 4 tight ends have teared their ACLs in front of you. It's time to step up, and we'll see what Benjamin Watson can bring. I like Terrence West. I've always liked Terrence West. I think Talafiero could be something, and I think people forget that Danny Woodhead is on the roster. I look at your front four on defense, and I love it. Like, of all the front fours in the NFL, yours is top 5 depth. Brandon Williams, Brent Urban, Terrell Suggs, Zadarius Smith, Bronson Kafusi, Carl Davis, Willie Henry, Chris Wormley. They're all huge. You have Suggs, you have Mosley. We'll see what happens with Correa. And then I look at your secondary, and I go, they got Tony Jefferson and Eric Weddle, which is the best safety combination they've had in Baltimore in a number of years. And if Jimmy Smith is healthy, man, Brandon, like you guys, there's a reason why Simms likes you guys, because you're deep. But how healthy is Joe Flacco going to be? Because back problems for older, tall quarterbacks are really, really scary. Is Mike Wallace and Brashard Perriman, are they going to be consistent? How is your offensive line? There's a lot of questions, but I think that you guys are built in such a strong foundation. I never see the Ravens lose by 20. I always see them blow the game by like 3 or 4 because they're so big they're always in the game. I think the Browns are going to be a lot better this year, and I think the years of Browns being an automatic 2 wins a season are over. Just that what they've done with their roster, they've gotten really, really big. I think the Bengals should be healthy, and I think the Steelers are the Steelers. So I think I think the North is going to end up being one of the tougher divisions. But I look at your team and go, oh, dude, they could be competing for the North easily.
Yeah, for me, the Ravens, the key for them is the offensive line because, we don't know how healthy Flacco is going to be once he comes back. So if the offensive line struggles and Flacco goes down, that'll be their season. But if they find a way to stay healthy on the offensive line and keep Flacco upright, I think they'll be decent. The Eagles, I go to school with, probably 70-75% Eagles fans, so I hear about Philadelphia sports all the time. And I agree. I do think they could be a contender in the NFC, up there with the Giants and possibly the Redskins, as you alluded to. I don't think the Cowboys are going to threat it all this year. I think they're going to slip back a couple wins than they were last year. But Adam, I do appreciate you giving me the time today. I really wanted to do this interview for a long time, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Awesome, man. Yeah, happy to do it.